with that, I would like to say thank you, Lieutenant Governor Owen, for your support on these initiatives, and welcome. We're looking forward to hearing your words today.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Consul General Stevens, and thank you for your leadership on this. But I don't know if you noticed, they put you and me between them and the dessert. Not a good idea. As a politician, it's one thing you know you don't keep people from, and that's their food. But anyway, thank you all for being here. It's a great honor to be able to speak on behalf of the state of Washington, be here with all of you today. Governor Christine Gregoire, I know, would have liked to have been here, but she had a very important meeting today, her annual joint cabinet meeting in Olympia with British Columbia Premier Christy Clark. We're very pleased this morning to be able to give them a warm welcome in the Senate. The Premier spoke. She did a magnificent job there, as did the Governor. And this joint cabinet meeting is a good thing. It's a great thing. And I suspect at least some of the issues that you're discussing here today are an important part of the discussions that they are having or have had in Olympia as well. In fact, I am pleased to announce that this morning's joint cabinet session yielded a letter to President Barack Obama and Prime Minister Stephen Harper that expresses our state and British Columbia's support for the Beyond the Border Action Plan and urge its implementation. But the letter is also on top of another measure that we're taking in the state legislature, a joint memorial to Congress, the Secretary of State, the Department of Homeland Security, the Secretary of Commerce, the Canadian government, and others, the provisions of the Beyond the Border Action Plan on perimeter security, economic competitiveness, and the Action Plan on regulatory cooperation are carried out. And that, I introduced the memorial as an executive request memorial after my meeting with Consul General Stevens, after he brought this to our attention, and we started working towards this effort. And I'm pleased to report to you that this morning the Senate put it out with only one vote against it, and I'll be having a discussion with him very, very soon on that. So, in the process of testifying in support of the memorial, which I did together with the consul, here's in a nutshell what I said and what I believe. That this initiative represents one of the most important cooperative agreements between Canada and the United States in recent memory. That with implementation of the plans, the vital economic partnership that joins our two countries will continue to improve, that our systems of governing and security and regulation will be simpler and more convenient and will aid, not hinder, our mutual economic development, and that this initiative will establish joint priorities for achieving a new long-term security partnership in 4 key areas guided by mutual respect for sovereignty and our separate constitutional and legal frameworks that protect individual privacy. And I can tell you on both sides of the border, I believe that maintaining our sovereignty and our independence is very important, but we can do that. So today, I'd like to use my time to make the case for gaining support from more people, including businesses, the farm communities, the public officials, and working to keep them and keep this process on track. Because I believe the one thing that we've talked about that we don't want to see happen is have this great concept, and I've read a lot of it. I'm excited about what's in it, but somebody has to do it. And we need to make sure that we keep moving forward on that. And so let's bring more players involved that are going to be affected by this. And we were talking about that a little bit over there. How do we get people that are not right on the border to understand how important this is to them as well? I know that the spirit of this meeting revolves around a shared vision for closer bonds between Canada and the U.S., and perhaps more specifically between the state of Washington and the province of British Columbia. In many ways, it actually seems odd, especially in this corner of the world, that we are separated by a border at all. Our commonality goes back many centuries to the days when our native peoples traveled and traded freely across the waters of Puget Sound, the Straits of Juan de Fuca, the passages that surround Vancouver Island and north. We have shared interests in natural resources, such as timber, fishing, and tourism. Our ports serve common and close markets in Asia and Russia. We speak more or less the same language, eh? You know, more or less. A thin cartographic line drawn between us is a reminder of the close and precious nature of our relationship. Our governments are both democratic in nature. Our families, you know, Canadians marry Americans, Americans marry Canadians. We learned that this morning when Senator Prentice stood up and said, "My son-in-law is from Canada." Our cultures are very much the same, with the core value systems that we have all grown up with, based on freedom, on mutual respect and goodwill, and appreciation for lawfulness and order. Even though our your Vancouver Whitecaps and our Seattle Sounders may proclaim a fierce rivalry on occasion, we often find ourselves fighting together in the same battles, whether it's overseas, where we frequently serve in combat hand in hand, or in working together to conquer a common enemy such as terrorists and drug traffickers and smugglers and the like. We're also working together for the common good on environmental issues and the allocation of our natural resources in the form of many treaties and agreements that have been signed over the years. While some among us may say that good fences make good neighbors, what this initiative is about is tearing at least some of those fences down, but at the same time making sure that we do so in an order to widen the path that crosses our yards, to share the easement that is our border, and to engage in pleasant neighborly conversations along the way. But before we do this, we must be prepared to solve not one, but many puzzles with interlocking pieces and even some moving parts. The two big boxes that these puzzles arrive in are the United States and Canadian governments. Inside the U.S. box are its 50 states, and 13 of which share a border with Canada. Inside Canada's box are its 10 provinces and territories, about half of which share a border with the U.S. as well. Dig in the boxes a little further and you have the cities, counties, towns, boroughs, villages, ports, and just importantly, the respective jurisdictions of our tribal and Aboriginal populations. Scattered all over the place are the businesses, the transportation systems, telecommunication systems, buildings, houses, and other infrastructure. And finally, you have the glue, the bolts and the nuts, and the other framework that somehow holds it all together: the friendship, the family, and the business relations. Complicating it all even further is the fact that there are really no clear set of directions on how to put these puzzles all together, or at least in a way that is logical to everyone who will be part of the final result. It's our job to make these puzzle pieces interlock in a way that is both functional and fitting and a source of pride. We want to look at the finished product and be proud of not only its appearance, but that it will be linked together as a solid framework for generations to come. So how do we do it? Neighborly cooperation can truly start with the small things, such as the burying of old grudges and starting anew. Some of you may be familiar with the story of Louis Sam. Louis Sam was a 14-year-old Stolo youth from a native village near Abbotsford who was lynched by an American mob in 1884. That was 5 years before Washington became a state and just 13 years after BC joined the Canadian Federation. I first became aware of the story of Louis Sam during a 2005 meeting with then Lieutenant Governor Iona Campagnola in Victoria. Louis Sam was wrongfully accused of the murder of Nooksack area shopkeeper James Bell, and he was turned over to BC deputy and held in custody. The vigilante mob of 100 or so stole across the border, kidnapped Louis Sam, rode back to Washington Territory, and lynched him from a tree. It was later proven that Louis Sam had absolutely nothing to do with the murder and that a great injustice had been done. In 2006, at the urging of Lieutenant Governor Campagnola, we were able to pass a resolution in the Washington State Legislature that offered our state's deepest sympathies for this injustice, which we presented to Stolo tribal leaders in our office in Olympia. Several tribes in Washington and Aboriginal bands in Canada, also took part in a number of healing drum circles, including one in the rotunda of our Capitol building. A whole lot of positive things happened after that, all of which brought us closer together. But the bottom line is that it is a story of how people of different cultures and backgrounds can work together to right even an old wrong and further solidify a strong and lasting friendship. If we can work together on repairing damage that was caused by an incident of more than a century and a quarter ago, we can work together on resolving the big issues that are between us today. And what I'm talking about really is the U.S.-Canada Beyond the Border Action Plan. It can begin with everyone in this room and then move with deliberate speed to help ignite into action those at the state and province and federal policy-making level. The good news is that Washington and British Columbia have already staked their claim, proving that there is a vital role for political subdivision to have input into the federally created Beyond the Border Action Plan. In fact, many aspects of plan implementation depend on cooperation of subnational governments. And we have many examples where we are either leading the charge or are certainly beginning to be engaged right here between the border of Washington and British Columbia. Examples of what is possible, what can be done. A prime example can be found with the Washington Enhanced Driver's License, or EDL. This was an initiative first proposed by Governor Gregoire and then Premier Gordon Campbell in 2006 to offset the Western Hemisphere Travel Initiative, which required passports with radio frequency identification chips rather than lesser forms of identification to travel between our borders in the wake of 9/11 terrorist attacks. It took a lot of hand-holding of the Department of State and the White House and a series of high-level discussions for both sides to agree to accept an equivalent document, but in the end, the EDL was created, along with a similar card for British Columbia residents that would be less expensive, less burdensome than a passport, but just as secure. In fact, the EDL contains an RFID chip just like the U.S. passport that is scanned electronically as travelers approach border crossing stations. More than 320,000 Washington residents have purchased these EDLs since they were established, and they're now selling at the clip of about 9,000 to 10,000 each month, constituting about 4% of all state driver's licenses in our state. The cost is just an additional $15 onto a $25 license, which is a considerable savings over the cost of a passport. British Columbia has a similar license, as do 4 or 5 other border states in the U.S. But we pioneered the EDL right here, and it was delivered well in time for the 2010 Olympics in Vancouver. While the higher priced Nexus Pass is still preferable for most frequent crossers, we would like to see an even higher rate of adoption of these enhanced driver's license on both sides of the border, so perhaps a little more marketing is needed to make our residents a little bit more aware.